monthly reads. So changing up things a little bit. Now we are live. So whenever you come in, feel free to join in the chats. I'm just going to go through my comics. If you guys have anything you want to say, just put it out into the chat box there. But yeah, I'm just going to kind of go through, talk about the comics that I've read. It's usually not a super long video. I've also never done one of these live, so it's usually been recorded all by myself. My hope is that as I get more and more viewers, that the videos might extend longer and that I can get some interaction, because I want to know what you guys have been reading as well. It's not just about me. I really enjoy seeing the variety of things that people read. I mean, I have mine, and most of mine, admittedly, are from the big two. I've got some indies thrown in there, and by indies, I usually mean like maybe a couple IDWs. I have a lot of Image, just things like that, a Dark Horse here and there. So even my indies are kind of bigger indies. But yeah, so if you guys hop in, let me know what you're reading. First, we have Amazing Spider-Man, and this is volume 1. I really got back into this. I kind of fell off of Spider-Man for a while. I just wasn't really that into the stories. But having said that, just seeing that Ryan Ottley and Nick Spencer were teaming up for this, I was in. I love Ryan Ottley's art. I fell in love with it on his run with Invincible. And Nick Spencer pulled me in whenever he did the Captain America run. So I was really into that as well. So yeah, I it's not something I pick up on a monthly basis, but it's definitely on my must reads for any sort of trade paperback. And I find that I'm kind of moving back towards that, unless it's going to be something I know for a fact that I'm going to read, and I want to read every single month. I usually just wait until the trades come out. It's cheaper on me. It's easier, and I've got some stuff that's coming up. So I'm going to have to start saving my money. So who knows? It might be more and more trades for me. Maybe my comic book reading days per month are going to slow way down at least. I can't ever say that it's going to go away, but, you know. All right, next. Got Aquaman. You know, I've said this before that I was real nervous with the new creative team. The story where Aquaman had died and he was on the island with all the old gods was really, really good. It was really compelling, a lot of new character development. But then to realize how he had died, I thought it was still based off of the drowned Earth situation, because it had seemed like he died. But then reading through, they said, no. It was something completely different. And about halfway through that issue where they kind of talked about it, I remember thinking, oh, is this going to go this way? That would be interesting. And I don't want to give too much away. If you want to read it, go read it. But it was really good. And even though, yes, I did call it while I was reading it, it was very satisfying, and it set it up to be an interesting story to develop for several volumes if they would like to. But it's also got far-reaching effects as far as what's this going to do to Aquaman's life. So, yeah, I'm a huge Aquaman fan anyway. Ever since Jeff Johns' run in the New 52 with Aquaman kind of revitalized that character. I've really been into it. I really liked all of the Aquaman Rebirth that came out during that whole launch. And like I said, new creative teams scare me because a lot of times you'll have a whole new creative team and it just doesn't mesh well with the story that you're so used to. But yeah, this creative team has been fantastic. And even though the art is more back to like the old school stuff, that I always complain about in the Flash comics, it really works, and it's really, really good. So yeah, if you're not reading that, at least go pick up the trades. Get the ones that pick up after Drowned Earth. I mean, go pick up all of them, obviously, but the ones that pick up after Drowned Earth is where you get like this new version of Aquaman that's coming out. Okay, next we have The Avengers number 22. Sorry, I'm still trying to get used to where my camera's at. Yeah, so this Avengers story, I really like how Jason Aaron's writing it, because it's one of those things where you have story, and then all of a sudden there will be a break off side story way, out in left field that doesn't seem to have anything to do with anything, or in the middle of a story, there will be something that you're like, okay, that seemed weird. But then all of a sudden, 6 issues later, they're building on it. And that's kind of what's been going on with Ghost Rider. Is it feels like they're building up towards something, because a while ago, the Johnny Blaze met up with the current Ghost Rider. I can't think of his name right now. Robbie met up with Robbie in Hell, and then they just kind of left it, and they went off and fought like vampires whenever he got back. So you kind of forget about it, but it was just a little something, and they're really exploring that, which I think is great, because Jason Aaron kind of cut his teeth on Ghost Rider, and I didn't even realize that until I started poking around a little bit. But yeah, and he did an awesome job. I mean, they weren't like earth-shattering stories, but to see him kind of go back and revisit that and kind of go full circle with it. I don't know which direction he's going with it, and I don't know how it's going to affect the Avengers, but I really like these. It's almost like a one-off, and it's the best ones. Okay, so he does this a couple different ways. One of them is he'll introduce a new idea, and then the next way is he'll go back to the first. So we've had the first Ghost Rider. We went back to Odin. I don't think they've talked about the Phoenix other than with Odin. And I feel like they've talked about, I don't know if they've done Agamotto. I don't think they've done the Black Panther. And they're getting ready to do the first ever Star Brand, which looks amazing because it's just a giant hulked out caveman who has the Star Brand on his chest. So yeah, it looks pretty good. And they're just like little one-offs, something to enhance the story. I don't know if it's ever going to build towards anything huge, but it's really awesome. So again, that's another one. If you're not picking up the Avengers, you should probably do at least the trades. All right, next we have The New Avengers by Jonathan Hickman. And whenever I bought this, it said Volume 2. I just got it on Amazon, so I did Volume 2. And then after I got done reading this, I got Volume 3. Well, what I didn't realize was that here's Volume 3, and here's quote-unquote Volume 2. And what it actually is, I think it's kind of a compendium too. So it's a few volumes put together. And it doesn't quite take you up to Secret Wars, but it takes you pretty close. So yeah, I'm now, instead of buying Volume 3 and 4, I'm probably just going to have to go and try to find compendium, or I don't think it's quite big enough for an omnibus. But yeah, because I'm trying to go through and read all of Jonathan Hickman's New Avengers stories leading up to Secret Wars, because when I picked up, I was just reading Secret Wars, and there's a lot that didn't make sense to me. Secret Wars is very complex and very difficult if you don't have any sort of basic knowledge, at least, of Marvel stuff. It's a really cool story, but you kind of have to know what you're reading in order to read it. And so I had enough to get me through. Plus I went on, like Comics Explained, and I'd watch that, and he would explain things so that I could kind of understand and get through. But going through and reading Jonathan Hickman's run is fantastic. And even if you do know everything there is to know about the Avengers and Secret Wars and Marvel in general, you should definitely be reading Jonathan Hickman's run on the New Avengers. He's a fantastic writer anyway. I've got a couple of Jonathan Hickman things in my stack other than New Avengers. So yeah, it's a must read. He's one of 5 or 6. If his name's on it, I'm gonna read it, and I kind of know I won't be disappointed. So okay, next we have City of Bane. This was just the Secret Files. So this is a bunch of little short stories, kind of talking about what was going to happen leading up to it, kind of putting all the villains and stuff in their place. I wasn't too into it. I don't know. Marvel and DC have started this thing where if it's a big issue, then they get a bunch of people, a whole team together, and they kind of make little short stories. They did it with Action Comics 1000. They did it with Detective Comics 1000. Marvel just did their Marvel 1000. And I'm not saying that those sucked or anything like that, because they didn't. And there were a lot of good stories and there's a lot of great art. But I don't want to get something just to have it. And these stories do build and they do add. But it's also one of those things that I'm like, I don't necessarily need it to fully understand. So I wasn't too excited about it, honestly. But that does bring us to Batman 74, Batman 75, City of Bane. Now, these are fantastic. Okay, so Tom King gets a lot of crap about his Batman run, and I don't know. I really like long stories. I love the fact that this story was supposed to take place over 118 issues. I really like the fact that, he does take 6 issues to cover one little thing, because it's kind of his way of emphasizing something. It's his way of saying, this is going to be important. I'm not just doing this for filler. I'm not doing this because I want to sell comics. I'm not doing this because I gave them a solid number and that's where I'm going to go. It's because this is important to the story and it needs to be right here and I need to be able to emphasize it. And, comics are on a 6-issue arc and that's what they are. It's 6 issues. And so I feel like there's not a whole lot of wasted time. There's not a whole lot of wasted space here. And I know a lot of people disagree with that. I know a lot of the dream, the nightmare sequence that he had, the sequence where Bruce Wayne was in court, the whole Mr. Freeze. I loved that one, by the way. Even though there wasn't, the art was real simple, the story was fairly simple. But the meaning behind it, this whole story arc is supposed to be chipping away at Batman, making him doubt absolutely everything he's doing. And so each piece, whether that's the nightmare sequence or the Mr. Freeze sequence or, losing Gotham and Gotham Girl or Catwoman leaving him or any of the other stuff that's happened, it's meant to chip away, to break him down, to show that, okay, I've got a lot more wrapped into this whole Batman thing than just me wanting to make sure that nobody else grows up an orphan. There's a lot more to it, and I think DC cutting him short is kind of the reason that a lot of people feel like they've been shortchanged. A lot of the reason is, okay, so if you have a story that's supposed to take 500 pages to tell, and then your editor comes in and says, well, you have to do it in 430. Okay, well, that's 70 pages that you don't have. And so you have to then scramble to readjust. You have to say, okay, what's absolutely vital and what would just enhance the story. So what's also happening is it's not that these are bad stories. It's that all of the things that could enhance the story, that could make the story better, now have to be taken out because they're not necessary, but they would make it better. And so you have to wonder, like, how much of that's going on in some of these Batman stories. And for me, I love the stories anyway. So I just think, how much better would they have been if Tom King had gotten to finish out his 118 or whatever issues. If you feel differently, let me know in the comments. I love talking comics, so if you disagree with me, that's great. If you agree with me, even better. Actually, it's probably not, because then we're just like, oh, I like this, and I like this too, and then we're done. But anyway, moving on. I've got a lot of Batman, so just strap in for that. Next, we have Detective Comics. And I've said this before. I love Tomasi's writing in general. I think he does an excellent job. But having said that, I don't really see a solid direction that Detective Comics is going. It seems like we have 6-issue story, 6-issue story, 6-issue story, and each one is compartmentalized from each other. And like I said, I like a long story. It can be 6 issues of a particular plot point, but I would like it to connect and run through, and I'm really just not seeing it. So unfortunately, I think Detective Comics might be one that hits the chopping block pretty soon. I really enjoyed, Detective Comics starting at Rebirth all the way through, because it had a focal point. You were working up towards Doomsday Clock. You were working up towards something, and it was all interlaced, and everything was working together, and it was very cohesive. And even though they're doing that with the Year of the Villain, in this one, it just still seems disjointed from even other Detective Comics stories. So, yeah, unfortunately, I might have to end up dropping it. I'm going to give it to the end of this run to see if it picks up. But other than that, probably not. If you're reading Detective Comics, let me know what you think. Do you feel the same way? Do you think I'm way off base by saying that? What do you guys think? All right, next we have Batman Last Night on Earth. Sorry to unfocused. First off, how awesome is that cover? Second, if you don't know why this cover is awesome and you don't understand why the Joker's head's in a lantern, go and pick up Batman Last Night on Earth. I'm not quite sure how it fits into anything, if it does fit into anything. It's Black Label, so I guess that means it doesn't really fit into any continuity. It's just Snyder and Capullo getting together to tell a crazy story. Or maybe it's divergent off of, the whole death of the family thing, and maybe that's canon, and then this is just a spur that also happened. I don't know. I probably have to read all the way through to figure it out, but typically Black Label means that it's a story all its own. Which I love. Some people think it's just a way for people to do whatever they want. And yeah, that's why it's so awesome, is because now Snyder and Capullo can go in, they can write a darker, grittier story, as long as they don't show Batman's junk. And you just get awesome stories out of it. I have a friend of mine, Bryce Abood. He has his own little script that he's written for a dark, gritty, edgy Superman story. And he also claims if you're going to be a writer, you have to have a Superman story. So I guess I need to get on that. But yeah, he pitched it to me, and it was pretty good. It'd be great for Black Label, I think. Next, speaking of Black Label, we have Curse of the White Knight. So I kind of missed the boat on the White Knight storyline. I got it in trade, loved it. I wish I would have gotten it by individual issue, but I missed the boat on that, and it was real hard to get back issues and stuff like that. So I just figured I'd wait, get the trade, does just as well. But yeah, the Curse of the White Knight. Oh man. So this is probably my favorite version of Batman as far as art stylings go. I love the cowl that's flipped up. I love it's got a very noir vibe to it. But I also love the character struggle that Batman has in all of these. because yes, he is Batman. Yes, he is dark, and yes, he is trying to save Gotham. But he also has to fight his own stubbornness, and that's something that you see glimpses of in other stories. But this is, how much damage have I done to Gotham, thinking that I was helping it, all because I was very stubborn. And even though it seemed like he may have gotten over that in the first one, we're seeing some more stuff crop up even now in this one. I can't give away too much, but Azrael looks phenomenal, like the coolest Azrael I've ever seen. And the way they build up this character is top notch. So great job to Sean Murphy and what is it, Matt Hollingsworth. The art is almost as good as the story. Like it's fantastic. Next we have Batman Who Laughs. This was a wrap up. So they ended the issue. They ended the story. What I didn't realize is that this was so I knew it was kind of going to lead into the whole Batman Superman comics, but it's almost like they did this to get everybody revved up only to do the Batman Superman. Like they had come up with the Batman Superman idea, and then they said, all right, well, we need something to get people involved. People need to be, invested in it. And so they went to Snyder, and Snyder was like, hell yeah, I'll write you a Batman story. It's so good. It's so good. And even though it is essentially just a setup series, it's written in such a way that you're like, yeah, they need to make this into a movie like yesterday. I really think that WB's got to loosen the reins on some of this stuff, and they've got to start letting people do darker, grittier movies. And I can't say that I know everything about what WB's doing, but I know that's a huge struggle is WB likes to kind of blow in the wind. So if perceived fans or future possible customers are outraged at something, then they say, no, we have to do away with this. Oh, we need to go this way, or we need to go that way. And we have to do, if they would just let creative minds take hold of some of these stories and tell them, they would rival Marvel all day. I mean, the stories coming out of DC Comics are phenomenal. They're so much better than Marvel in my mind, with the exception of a few. There's a few stories coming out of Marvel that I'm like, okay, these are top notch. But if you look at my stack, broken down between the big two, it's mostly DC, and those are solid stories that are coming out. All of them would be fantastic, shows or movies. Personally, if you could get a quality show, not like cheaply done, not like a sci-fi original movie or anything like that, but if you get, Netflix level or HBO level or Showtime, something, Amazon Prime, I don't care what it is, get some high-end production into it so that it's not all just crappy CGI, and actually make a show, then just go with it and ride it out and let the people make it how it needs to be made. And if people respond well, then they respond well. If they respond poorly, well, you're still doing better off or the same as you are right now. I mean, right now your entire universe has stalled, and so you got to figure something out, man. It's there's too much good writing to not do anything with it. Okay, next we have Deceased. And this is the variant cover. I've been picking up all of these covers because obviously they're doing zombie versions of all of the DC characters. It's not a Batman story, but obviously if it's a DC story with all the superheroes, Batman's going to be heavily involved in it. And I was shocked at what happened within the first, that's issue 4. Within the first 2 issues, it's like mind-blowing what's going on. So If you're not reading Deceased, do it. At first, I thought it was just going to be like, oh, this will be a fun read. It's a little side story, doesn't have any effect on anything. But yeah, it's just a fun distraction. No, this thing it's legit. It's so good. And again, since it is separate from everything else, it could be its own little mini series if they wanted it to be. Next, we have Jonathan Hickman, East of West. This is volume 2. Jonathan Hickman likes to write things in such a way where he drops you in the middle of something and then the characters talk like you've been there the whole time. And so I just read volume 2, and it answers some questions from volume 1, but it's still carrying on themes. And I'm like, I'm not quite sure what's going on. And usually that'll just turn me off. If I have to try too hard, I mean, that's 2 volumes that you're stringing me along on some of this stuff. And it's not like I can't wait to find out what this is, or, I can't wait to find out what this means. There are always secrets and Easter eggs and stuff like that you hide in writing. But to be utterly confused as to what is going on for almost 2 volumes. And what's crazy, and we'll talk about this with the Powers of X and House of X too. But in here, you're in this universe and you vaguely know what's going on. You have this spots all over the place, and as you read, it becomes slightly clearer, and you read a little more. And so in volume 3, I'm sure it'll focus a little bit more, but not much. It's not much of a focus. And so 1, it's a great way to tell super long stories. 2, he adds so much action in it, and sometimes he will bring up a question and then he'll bring up an answer, and you'll get in one single issue, he'll tie up that loose end. And so it's almost like a manic form of writing that he has, because he's got one through line, and then there's just hundreds of phrase that are coming off of this, and he'll slowly go in and put that fray back in there, and then he'll tie up this loose end over here, and then he'll tie up this loose end over here, all while moving towards his ultimate storyline. And so by doing that, I think it leaves, at least for me, it leaves me satisfied enough that I kind of know what's going on a little bit more. I'm understanding this world a little bit more. But it also keeps me guessing and keeps me questioning as to what the hell is going on here. So yeah, it's fantastic. And this is one that, I mean, obviously East of West has been out, forever. But yeah, it's really good. And I was shocked by it. It's one that I've always heard of, but I just never gotten around to picking it up. And then I did, and blew my mind. Okay. Next we have The Flash 74. This was year 1, and then we've got The Flash 75. I believe, this is the finale. I loved year 1. I thought it was a nice break from the regular story. I also liked the nod back to the Williamson Porter team up, and I wish that would come back for Flash. It's not that the art's crappy or anything in the new creative team. It's just I love Porter's art. It's probably it's best lent to the Flash. I also loved it whenever he teamed up and they did the crossover and Porter did Green Lantern's art. Oh man, I can't really explain why I enjoy it. But it's just so satisfying to look at, especially with all the lightning and the sharp edges and stuff like that. It just lends itself to Porter's art style. So yeah, somebody go out there and start a petition to get Porter back on the Flash, or get Morrison off of Green Lantern and then get Porter on with an awesome writer for Green Lantern, because he needs to do one of the two. Next, Gideon Falls. This is another story. I love Jeff Lemire's writing, by the way, but this is another story just like Jonathan Hickman. There is some sort of through line that this story is progressing on but then everything is such chaos. And I mean, whoever's doing the art should probably, who is that? Dave Stewart. Dave Stewart probably needs more money than Jeff Lemire. If you're going to go on quantity of work, Jeff Lemire will go an entire issue of Gideon Falls and have maybe a paragraph worth of writing in there, and the rest, it's almost, you almost don't need the writing. It's so good, the art. And I understand. I'm just kidding about the whole Jeff Lemire getting paid less, but because the story is so good and the art is so good and they work so well together that you could almost just tell the story using nothing but images. The images also, if you are on any sort of psychedelic, or if you are if you've been drinking or smoking or anything that might have impaired your mental faculties for a small period of time, do not read Gideon Falls because it will make you feel like you've done shrooms or something. The art and page breakdown is just insane. It's insane. That's the only way. And it's very much supposed to be insane, and it's supposed to make you feel insane. There's a certain stress that you get while you're trying to read it because your brain is trying to make sense of what it's seeing, but then it's also trying to understand the story that you're reading. And so your brain kind of freaks out a little bit almost whenever you start reading it. The story's starting to come together a little more. It's starting to become a little more focused, whereas before it was just crazy stuff, crazy stuff, crazy stuff. And you kind of had to pick which crazy stuff you thought that it was going to go in. But yeah, it's phenomenal. It's so good that my wife is reading it, and she's like, "Did you get the new one yet? Do you have the new one? Where's the new one?" So yeah, it's the only comic I've ever gotten my wife to read. So yeah, good job, Jeff Lemire. All right. Then we have Iron Man, issue number 14. And these have also been pretty good. They're simple stories. Again, they're not like earth-shattering, but I think it's a great way to capitalize on kind of the, in-game death of Iron Man sort of thing. He died in the movie and he died in the comic, not at the same time. Obviously, he died in the comic, a while before. But he's come back in the comic, and he's kind of trying to deal with this as well as revisiting some other things that have happened in his life. And so obviously there's action because there has to be, it's a comic, but you could almost write Iron Man as just sort of a drama where it's very character based and then the action is secondary. And I think you'd have so much source material there. It would just be a pretty easy way to write Iron Man, actually. But yeah, it's really good. Dan Slott's doing a great job with it. I know some people dislike Dan Slott because of how he handled Spider-Man, but he's doing right by Iron Man, in my opinion. And like I said, they're simple stories, but they get you so emotionally invested that you just keep reading. Next, we have, this is the reason that my poll list or my reading list was so small. Again, Jonathan Hickman, Secret Wars. If you have not read this, this is must-read comics. I think this was the springboard that could have launched Marvel into the second golden age of comics, and then Marvel completely crapped the bed. They dropped the ball in a big way. You had a perfect setup. You had a perfect event that literally resets the multiverse. This event resets the multiverse. You have a clean slate to cherry pick your stories of this is continuity, this is not, this stays, this goes, this is here, this is gone. You had it, and you were right there at the finish line, and then Marvel sat down on the track and crossed its arms and pouted and said, no, we're not going to do it. And everything just went back to normal. And it was just such an opportunity lost. You you have all these people who are flooding in to read comics because of the success of the movies, and they're all kind of lost and they don't know where to start because you're on Iron Man 734 and Spider-Man's coming close to 1,000 issues, and the X-Men, who knows what's going on with the X-Men. So this was a way for them to consolidate, start new, bring in all of these new readers that are coming in off of the movies, and they didn't. And it was so disappointing because it was such a good story, and it was so compelling because you're like, oh my God, how are you going to restart this? What's going to stay? What's going to go? How are you going to tell these stories? You don't have to retell the stories. DC did it with Rebirth and Doomsday Clock. They're explaining why you had a universal reset. You now have the ability to go through and say, well, we really like this story, so it's going to stay. Well, this story really sucked and everybody hated it universally, so that doesn't count. It's a way for you to keep the Killing Joke is now continuity for sure. We can establish that. And then Convergence, yeah, that didn't actually happen. We didn't have Convergence. What are you talking about? This is a new universe. That doesn't stay. So yeah, it would be one thing if Secret Wars sucked. If they had done Secret Wars, it was a huge flop, didn't work. Then they could be like, we're just kidding. That didn't really happen. But instead, you get Jonathan Hickman to write some of his best work inside of Marvel, and then you just throw it away. Oh, I can't imagine how Hickman felt. As a writer, I know that I would have not been too excited about it. And I probably would have said, you guys owe me big time. And maybe that's what happened, because here in a second, we're going to see some stuff that Hickman's been writing that is kind of crazy. All right, next we have Spider-Man. This is based on the game. Dennis Hopeless wrote it. Really, whoever wrote the game wrote this. But the cover art's amazing. The art inside of it's awesome. It's also really fun to relive the game without having to play the entire game. It's much easier for me to read a comic than to go back and replay the game constantly because I like the story. But also, we've got our first, I haven't read it yet, but we have our first introduction to a brand new storyline that's going to tie into the Gamerverse. And I don't know if it's going to be before or after, or if it's kind of amongst, or what's going to happen, because I know they have several DLCs for the Spider-Man game, but this is supposed to center around a specific suit that is in the game, the Velocity suit. So it's going to be interesting to see how that works out. But I love the story anyway. I love the game. And so, even though the game came out not that long ago, it still has great nostalgia for me because the game was that good. So reading the comic just kind of brings up all those memories, and it makes me want to go play the game again. Next, we have Superman Volume 1, Son of Superman. This came out of the DC Rebirth. I kind of put off reading it just because I had been reading so much. And usually I don't buy a trade unless I absolutely just want to read it. Like, I've been hearing about this story, like Middle West. I'm going to get the trade of Middle West because it's just a story that I've been hearing people talk about nonstop. And so it's either something that people keep telling me I need to read, or it's something that I'm going to do a comic rundown on with somebody. And so those are usually the reasons that I buy trades. And I had somebody in mind for the Superman, but they weren't sure that they wanted to do an do a podcast with me. So I'm still trying to work on that. But I bought this. Once they said they didn't want to do it, I kind of set it aside, and I didn't read it. I mean, I literally had this thing for like a year and a half, and I just never got around to reading it. Even though I'm reading Superman right now, I picked up on Superman pretty late in the game. But man, it's so good, so good. It's I don't know. Tomasi is just one of the greats, and I don't know that he gets enough recognition. But man, the Tomasi, Williamson, the whole crew that came in with Rebirth on, Superman, Green Lantern, Batman, all those stories, just phenomenal writers. And to see them now into other things really just makes me want to follow them instead of following the stories. So it's a fantastic story. And I was one, whenever I got back into comics, I was real hesitant about Superman because I'm like, it's Superman. He's so strong. He just punches everything. But man, there are some compelling stories in these Superman volumes. So yeah, if you've been putting off Superman, go read it. Give it a try. Start with Rebirth. I mean, don't even start with New 52. Start with Rebirth, and man, so good. Speaking of Superman, we have a few. So I have Superman. Can you see that? It's 13. And this is the Brian Michael Bendis run. Some people hate Brian Michael Bendis writing Superman, which is understandable because the first thing he did was retcon Superman, which is a bold move. Whenever you get hired at the new place, you don't go through and try to clean sweep everything that's ever been done in that story or everything that's ever been done in that job. So it's a ballsy move to do. Personally, I'm not that emotionally attached to the history of Superman. Now, if you would have said, oh, well, he was actually born on Earth, and if you would have changed it that much, but deciding who actually destroyed Krypton, it doesn't affect me. Also because I like Rogol Zaar. I think he's an awesome character. It's essentially smart Doomsday. I know when I say that, I mean like how tough he is, how dangerous he is, not necessarily like, oh, they retcon Doomsday as well. No, completely separate characters, but yeah, he's essentially smart Doomsday. But yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I haven't finished this run on it yet, but I've heard he kind of yada yadas his way through. And he sometimes Bendis does that. It's just like, oh, I need this to end a certain way, so here's how it's going to end. But for the most part, it's a really good story. Personally, I think some of his best work is in Action Comics. I think at first I wasn't too into it. Honestly, at first I like Superman's run better. But now as I'm reading it instead of saying Superman Action Comics, it should more be like a Clark Kent, Lois Lane story. And honestly, it's focused more on Lois than it has Superman. So it's all leading into the event Leviathan that's been going on. But I don't know. It's fun to see Superman be somebody other than Superman. He's Clark Kent. He's trying to be a detective, which isn't necessarily his strong suit. So yeah, it's just a different angle to look at Superman, and it's not bad. Next, we have Thor. And this was kind of bittersweet because, as we all know, Jason Aaron is leaving the Thor run after his Old Man Thor run. I don't know. I can't remember what they're calling it, but it's essentially Old Man Thor. But he's been teasing this forever. Even inside of, before War of the Realms even started, we saw Loki get the Necro Sword. We saw a whole bunch of stuff going on with Wolverine as the Phoenix. And so hopefully we see all of those things come about within this next story that he's going to do. Loki is returning to his old evil self, which is kind of refreshing. I love seeing Loki as kind of not necessarily a hero, but somebody trying to do good. I really enjoyed that storyline, and I think there's a lot more play to that. But we all know eventually he's going back to evil, and it looks like in this story he's going full evil. So it's gonna be really good. A fitting end to Jason Aaron's run on Thor. Next, we have Jason Aaron again with Valkyrie, and holy crap! If you want to talk about a way to end issue number 1. Issue 1. I'm not gonna spoil it. But issue number 1 is bonkers. Like, it's crazy, and it's not that it's action packed. There's not a whole lot of action because in an issue number 1, you have to introduce people, you have to introduce ideas, you have to kind of set the stage, and then issue number 1 drops a bomb. So not going to say anything else. Go out and pick it up. If you're on the fence about it, don't be. Pick up issue number 1. What does it cost? It's $4. Go buy number 1. Then you can say, oh, I've got the number 1. But yeah, if you don't like it, don't read it. My guess is it's going to leave you wanting more. So just go read it. All right. Next, we have probably the most anticipated and most confusing story of 2019. We have Powers of X, House of X, Powers of X 2. Now, this again, Hickman drops you in the middle of not 1, not 2, but 3, and 3 plus storylines. So as you're reading this, you are in 3 different timelines, maybe not timeline, 3 different places in a timeline, where you're before the X-Men, or as the X-Men are forming. You are 10 years after the X-Men, and then 4. Wait. Okay, see, even I'm confused. So you have before the X-Men, you have as the X-Men are forming, you have 10 years after the X-Men, you have 100 years after the X-Men, you have 1,000 years after the X-Men. And then also you have these, I don't know if alternate timelines isn't the right way to say it, because it's more like resetting timelines. But what happened in the other timelines are also important. So you have to juggle 8 timelines, 4 to 5 different locations on those timelines, and each one is affecting the other ones. It is insane. And this is what I'm talking about. He did the same thing with East of West. He drops you in like you're supposed to know. And then in between segments of a comic, he has these little paragraphs that describe, this is what these doorways are, and each one means this, and this is what sentient machines are, and here's the levels leading up to, the ultimate machine that we have going on 1,000 years from now. And so it's just building and building and building and building and building and building. And essentially, I know it's 2 different stories that are 6 issues long. It's a 12-issue story. And because there's a reading order to it. And if you don't read it in that order, then you're not going to understand anything going on. So if you're like, well, I just want Powers of X, then good luck. But yeah, it's phenomenal. I got out of X-Men a long time ago, and I never got back into it because it was so confusing. There's so much going on. There's a million different mutants, and all of them have their own stories, and all of them have influenced things in various ways, and they're subtle things. And this person's trapped inside of this person's body, and they didn't reset that for 10 years. But then all of a sudden they do because they're tired of writing or a new team came in. So much change. There was also like 7 titles coming out for X-Men. You had X-Men, X-Men Gold, X-Men Blue, X-Men Aqua, X-Men Ultraviolet. I mean, those are fictitious. Don't get on here and yell at me. But you had a million different X-Men things. You had mutants doing everything. And now, from what I've heard, this is supposed to consolidate and explain. And Honestly, it does. It does this weird thing where you're reading it and you're like, you're frustrated because you don't understand it. You're like, what the hell is going on? But then by the end of the story, you're like, okay, so I need to read the next issue because this is what's happening and this is what's happening. And you have just enough of an understanding of what's happening. You have just enough of an understanding to be like, yeah, I know what's going on. And you don't even realize that you know what's going on because the whole comic, you're like, what the hell's going on? But then by the end of it, you're like, yeah, I know what's going on. I get it. Even though like it's such a weird conundrum to be in while you're reading. And I don't understand how he does it, but he does it, and he does it well because this is one of my favorite stories out right now. After I started reading the first one, I was like, I don't understand this. I'm not going to like it, and I'm going to miss out on, the most awesome story that anybody's ever going to talk about because I wasn't smart enough to get it. It is very intimidating, especially coming in cold. I came in absolutely cold. I didn't keep up with any X-Men. I know what happened in House of M, and that's it. There's a lot of X-Men between now and House of M. And so, I knew zero going into this. So if you have even a general understanding and you're worried about jumping into this, worry about it. You'll get it figured out. He does a great job. Like I said, those breaks in between sections of comic, he does a really good job of explaining the way things are set up. And that's all it is. It's almost like you're looking into a computer and you open a file, and that file contains all of one thing. And it's any piece of information that you need to know about that one thing. And then you open another file and it explains this other thing. And then you open another file. And so it's compartmentalized and it has something, it lends to the story. But it also explains everything to you. So you get, oh, okay, so here's the hierarchy of machines, or, oh, here's the timeline of how things happen. And, oh, here's the 8 different things, and this is why this veered off this way and this veered off the other way. And it's complicated, but it's so good, and it's so easy to understand and comprehend once you actually dive into it. So yeah, if you're at all worried about it, go pick it up anyway. Do it anyway because you don't want to miss out. And it really has me excited to see what comes after this as far as X-Men. Hopefully they can consolidate down, kind of like what they did with House of M, where it makes it more manageable, and then they don't just explode out again. So that's all I have right now. That's my monthly reads for August. I'm working on September right now. So yeah, if you liked any of the comics that I had, let me know what they were. If you hated any of the comics that I had, let me know what they were and why. If there's anything that I should be reading, let me know. Hit me up. If you want to be a part of one of my comic rundown episodes, hit me up, DM me. You can find me on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube at The Comic Den. Real super easy to get a hold of me. Yeah. So that's all I've got, guys. I hope you guys like the live stream. Hopefully we can start getting more and more people to show up for these. This was kind of spur of the moment. I'd like to have a set time that I do these every month. Maybe something that I do every week. I don't have enough comics that I read every week to have a weekly pull. But yeah, probably just going to be once a month. But yeah, hopefully you guys enjoyed. See you later.